welcome to the stage, Kathryn Leigh.
It was early 2015, and I was back on my computer checking to see if I had any new comments on a story that I'd posted. This had become a ritual over the last year and a half. Some might say compulsion, because I was doing it like 2 or 3 or 30 times a day. But you see, I was done. I had just posted my 10th and final chapter on lit erotica. Yay! This is a site where you can post and read free erotic stories, kinky and erotic stories. And I had gone from a long-time reader to a first-time writer and had been welcomed with open, leather-clad arms. To this day, my story has over 500,000 views, almost 250 comments, and it remained on a Hall of Fame page for almost 5 years. Some of the comments said that they loved the story, others lusted after the characters, some shared that the sex was hot and that it had the desired effect that they had been looking for. A few were critical, but more often than not, I was commended for having written a relatable and realistic story about power exchange, BDSM. There were no billionaires with private helicopters and red rooms of pain. It was simply about a woman in her 40s, recently divorced, finally exploring her sexual desires, specifically her submissive desires. And the reason why I was able to write this story is because I was that woman, except that at that time I was still in the marriage and still not doing anything about it, except for watching a fair amount of porn. So much so that to this day, I'm surprised that my Facebook ads aren't trying to sell me floggers and nipple clamps. I was also reading a fair amount of erotic stories, but they just were not that relatable. And I figured if they weren't relatable to me, then they probably weren't relatable to a lot of other women that were my age. And so, of course, I decided I was just going to write a story. But how in the world was I going to write a story about real BDSM when I had zero experience with real BDSM? I mean, nada, outside of maybe a couple little spanks during doggy style. And so I marched myself down to my favorite sex-positive neighborhood store, Shebop, because not only do they have amazing toys, they have shelves and shelves of books. And so I did research. I looked up the tenets of safe, sane, and consensual. I looked up the difference between doms and subs and tops and bottoms and masters and slaves. I learned definitions like subspace and subdrop. I spent a little extra time reading about erotic pain and the endorphin release that you're supposed to get from that, and that kind of intrigued me a little bit. And that's also where I discovered shibari, Japanese rope bondage. It is not just a kink, but a beautiful, beautiful art. And I spent weeks, maybe months, researching pictures and videos. I went to live performances right here in Portland. And I would be in the audience looking down at these women adorned in beautiful rope, often suspended in the air. And I wanted to feel that. I wanted to experience that. I wanted to feel that rope pressing in me, and I wanted to feel that level of strength and vulnerability. During that time, I also researched about communication, because for healthy BDSM, there has to be communication. So when I sat down to write my story and to develop my characters, communication and honesty were the hallmark of their relationship. And as those chapters posted and the comments started coming in, people were loving my story. They were relating to my characters. And if they were relating to my characters, that meant that they were relating to me. And I didn't feel so alone. At that time, I was also getting letters from mostly women, candid and vulnerable stories from their own lives. One woman named Lynn shared with me that after 20 years of marriage, she read my story out loud to her husband as a way to tell him that she wanted to sexually submit to him. And then they also got into shibari, the two of them. And then another woman, Kate from New Zealand, wrote me, and after chronic fertility issues and years of mechanical sex with her husband, she had completely lost her sex drive and ended up rediscovering it through erotica, discovered my story, shared it with her husband, and the two of them were now exploring BDSM together, and their sex lives were better than ever. And these women and their letters really touched my heart, but it wasn't lost on me that they were able to do something that I wasn't able to do. While my story had been a catalyst for them, I was not able to share like they were their desires. And so while Lynn and her husband were playing with rope in their bedroom, I was still looking at pictures at that time. So in the year that I posted my final chapter, my husband and I did sign our divorce papers. But just like life imitating fiction, I was ready to explore my desires. But unlike my characters who conveniently met at a gym, I had to look online. And so I turned to FetLife, which, as you know, is a kinky Facebook essentially. Great pictures, great stories, and even better ads, especially if you are looking for floggers and nipple clamps. And it didn't take me long to meet a man who identified as dominant. He had written in to a local group that he was in from out of the country and looking for a submissive woman for a while. He was here for a few months. And so I thought, well, how easy was that? And so I wrote him, and I shared with him, well, I don't really have a lot of experience, and I'm kind of interested in rope play. And he wrote back to me that he was not a psycho, and that was good enough for me. And it didn't take long for us to decide to meet and see if we wanted to play. And so I met him at a coffee shop near his apartment. And oh my God, my body was buzzing because this man was tall, he was handsome, he had a deep Irish accent. And I had arrived that day smug and confident that I knew the language and the rules behind safe BDSM. I was going to talk to him about my desires. I was going to talk to him about my limits, my expectations, my safe word. But when I brought these concepts up to him, he quickly dismissed them. Don't be silly, he said. None of that's necessary. If you need me to stop, just tell me to stop. And that's when I kind of questioned myself. I mean, what did I really know? He was the real-life dom. I just wrote stories. And so in less than 20 minutes after meeting, we were taking an elevator up to his apartment. And when we walked into his apartment and he told me to strip, it was as if my pussy had eaten my brain. My mind was racing. Is he going to tie me up? Is he going to spank me? Is he going to tease orgasm after orgasm out of my body? And then is he going to hold me as I come, just like I wrote in my story, just like I'd read about? Is he going to hold me until I come down from all of those endorphins? Suck my cock were actually his next words. But okay, I mean, that sets a mood, right? And so I got down on my knees, and I was going to be the best little sub ever. And I'll tell you, it actually started off pretty well, but then he took over, and he became very rough with me. And he didn't really seem to care that I was really gagging and choking, but he sure pulled out fast when I vomited all over him and the floor. And that's when I really started to question my story a little bit more. I mean, my characters were not vomiting on each other. But, like good little troopers, we cleaned up and we kept going. And I have to say, there was no safety, there was no sanity, and there was definitely no communication. It was just bad, rough sex, and he was hurting me. And in my brain, I'm like, where are the fucking endorphins that I'd been reading about? But this wasn't erotic pain, it was just pain. And I didn't say anything, and he didn't ask. And everything that I had learned, everything I'd researched, everything that I had written about went out the window. So when he said, lick my left nipple and fondle my balls while he jerked himself off, I was all in and halfway out the door. I'm like, if this is what's gonna get him off. But then as I was leaving, he hugged me. You were wonderful, he said. Please come back tomorrow. And that's when I questioned myself again. Maybe that was standard, healthy BDSM play. Maybe that was exactly what I had been looking for. And despite my screaming back pain, and despite the bruises that were forming on my body, I did go back the next day. And when I walked in and there was rope waiting for me, I was so excited because he had remembered that I had told him I wanted rope. But when he tied me up, it didn't feel right. It was very uncomfortable. It was tight. I lost feeling in my arms and in my hands. And then there was more bad and rough sex. And he released me so that I could lick his left nipple and fondle his balls as he jerked himself off. And we never did hook up again after that, but it wasn't because I'd come to my senses. It wasn't because I had told a friend. And it wasn't because I didn't think that I didn't deserve everything that had just happened to me. It was because I actually was very badly injured, to the extent that to this day I still have permanent nerve damage. In the weeks and the months that followed, my body healed, but my esteem and my emotions were shattered. I was embarrassed, I was shamed, I was angry, and I could not forgive myself for having put myself in that kind of danger. And then I thought about my story. What a sham. Nothing real about it at all. And I was about ready to delete it. But the comments were still coming in, and the letters, and people were still loving the story, and they were still relating to my characters, and they were still finding inspiration from it. And from their inspiration, I decided to take my own, because I'd come to realize what I had just been through was not what I'd been looking for, and I really still wanted to find it. And so, with baby steps, I decided to try again. And I had started dating again on the more mainstream sites, and they were light and easy and sexy, no kink, but still a lot of fun. But most important, I was exercising communication, and I expected nothing less from my dates. And one day, and I was swiping left faster than you can actually read, I stopped on a really handsome man, really handsome. And I was reading his profile, and about halfway down his profile, my eyes locked onto one word, shibari. It turned out that this man was not only an expert of shibari, he was an instructor. I looked him up, he was legit. And so I contacted him, and I expressed my interest in shibari, in Japanese rope bondage, and he genuinely and warmly wrote me back, answering any and all of my questions about rope play, but also just about the Portland BDSM scene at large and how to safely engage with it. So we decided to meet, and so once again, I'm heading to a coffee shop to meet a man to consider playing with him. But this time, the two of us spoke for over an hour and a half about our families, about our lives, about my desires, about my limits, about what I hoped to get from the experience. And I was honest to him about what had happened to me and about the injury that I had endured. And he took this very seriously. And he said, if we're going to play, you need to communicate with me any distress, no matter how insignificant or incidental it may seem to you. And I assured both of us that I would. And so we set up a safe word, and on his insistence, a safe call. I called a friend of mine, which I'd never done in my life, really shared this side of myself. I called a friend of mine, and I told her where I was going, what I was going to be doing, and when to call the police if she didn't hear back from me. And we took separate cars, and we arrived at his house, and we went into the room, and there was beautiful rope waiting for me on the shelves. There were pulleys and hooks up on the ceiling. We talked a little bit more. He checked in with me, made sure I was feeling okay, and I told him I was ready. And so he then offered, you can get naked or you can stay clothed. It didn't take long for me to strip. I like being naked. And then, with confidence and expert precision, he began to wrap and weave intricate patterns of rope around my body, shaping me to his intent, frequently checking the rope to see if it was binding me or pinching me in any negative way. And despite the fact that I was stretched and spread and rope was pushing into my skin, it felt exquisite. It was setting off nerve endings that I didn't even know that I had. And I told him I was happy and I was comfortable and I wanted more. So he blindfolded me, which only made all of those delicious sensations become much more intense and acute. And then all was silent for a moment, and in that time, he must have passed a little bit of rope over one of those pulleys, because the next thing I knew in my blindness, I was being lifted off of the ground and suspended, just like I had seen in those performances and just like I had written about. And with a gentle push, he sent me into a slow and disorienting spin, and I just felt the world drop away from me. And it was one of the most exquisite moments, and I felt that sweet, sweet vulnerability that I had been seeking. And he stopped the movement in just enough time to hold a vibrator against me. And I just shattered. And so afterwards, he did hold me and he talked to me as the world began to take form again, as my brain went back online. And we stayed that way until he felt that I was safe to drive home. And with big hugs, he walked me to the car. And from the car, I called my friend and I excitedly told her everything that had just happened and that I was safely on my way home. And then later that night, as I marveled with wide eyes at the beautiful patterns of rope that still decorated my body, I even took pictures. I forgave myself for the mistakes that I had made, and I said a silent thank you to Lynn and to Kate and to all of my other readers for helping me to have moved beyond my words and to find my voice.